Greetings and welcome to another 3-minute therapy podcast. And on our 3-minute therapy podcast, we discuss issues related to REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy. And Kevin, do you want to say a little words about rational emotive behavior therapy to orient the new viewers?
Sure. Rational emotive behavior therapy is it's one of the cognitive behavior therapies. The original CBT, so to speak, pioneered by Albert Ellis. And what rational emotive behavior does is identifies that our emotions are created by our thinking, by our beliefs. We basically make a lot of demands on ourselves, and most of the time we're not aware of it. Sometimes we could actually say we all have irrational attitudes, that things have to go the way we want them to, or I have to perform the way I want to perform. And because we make those demands, we upset ourselves. We give ourselves anger, anxiety, depression, and all of those things. We help you by helping you change your thinking and change your beliefs. That's it in a nutshell.
Yes. And well, first of all, I'd like to introduce us. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein. I'm a clinical psychologist. I do my practice remotely on Zoom, phone, and other platforms. And I've written a book called 3-Minute Therapy, which describes REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, and applies it to different areas of your life. And Kevin, my partner here, is Kevin Benbow, is also an REBT therapist. And we're both very experienced and very expert, if I do say so myself. And this is brought to you by by Chris Rossini, who is our technical person. So it couldn't happen without Chris. So I'd like to thank Chris for doing the technical and Kevin for joining me on the podcast. So you can tune in weekly and get a new subject and a new podcast. If you have any suggestions for subjects, please let us know in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up. Donate to us on Patreon if you'd like to support us, and continue to follow us on the podcasts. Today, we're going to be discussing an REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy approach to happiness. And I'll start off this time, Kevin. And happiness normally is not something you do directly, unless you do drugs, but that happiness will not be very long-lived. Happiness is normally a byproduct of what you do. So the issue is, what can you do that will help make you happy? Now, we normally start with the problem separation technique, which divides problems into emotional problems and practical problems, and happiness comes under both. So the emotional problems people normally have that suppress their happiness are demands, as Kevin was saying, musts and shoulds. Because I prefer to do well and get approval, I absolutely must. I'm no good if I don't. Because I prefer you treat me well, you absolutely must. And you're a no good person if you don't. And life must go well because I prefer it. And if it doesn't, then my life is horrible. So those are the three main musts that come from the three preferences about areas of one's life. So that covers emotional problems. So the first step is when you want to have a happier life, is to look for any musts or shoulds, any demands that you have. Usually it's in one of those three categories that may be blocking you. Was there anything else you want to say, Kevin, about the emotional, or would you want to go on to the practical aspect of happiness?
Yeah, about the emotional, probably one of the most common irrational beliefs I encounter in my practice about happiness is, I just want to be happy. And really, what I think I'm hearing is I have to be happy. I need a guarantee that I'm going to be happy. And interestingly, the more we demand that we be happy, the more fleeting, the more difficult it becomes to be happy. There's an irony about that. That also happens in secondary distress when we're upset about being upset. But really, there's no guarantee that we'll be happy all the time. Happiness is a transient state. And I would throw out there that if we didn't have the unpleasant emotions, we wouldn't be able to recognize happiness in the first place. So there is no guarantee that we'll be happy all the time. No therapist or drug can make you happy all the time, but we can make ourselves reasonably happy over the course of our life, regardless of our circumstances. I strongly believe that.
Yes, I agree with that. And another false belief that people have about happiness, which is not related to musts or shoulds necessarily, is if I only do X or if only Y happens, then I'll be happy. And a common one is if only I had more money, if only I made $10,000 more a year, then I'd be happy. Or if only my mother or partner or son or daughter treated me better and was more reasonable, I'd be happy. Or if only I didn't have this physical ailment or disease, then I would be happy. But the way to be happy, as we've been saying, is to get over your musts and shoulds and then try to take pleasure in what's ever going on. And what's going on normally is a process, not a product. So if you have a problem in your life, the product is solving the problem, but that's fleeting. Once it's solved, and you move on. The process is working toward solving the problem. And one of the main keys to happiness is enjoying the process by eliminating your musts and shoulds about being at the solution. Now, some of the practical issues that people deal with that would help make their life happier is one, having a healthy life and surviving, living a long life. And that could be a process, an enjoyable process, or if you think you have to be totally healthy right now, that's not going to work in terms of happiness. Another category is finances, and that involves the process of having work, being employed, or having investments, having savings, so you can buy the essential aspects of living, food, and housing. Relationships also are another practical aspect of life, very important one that leads people to be happier. And that's having a family that you relate well with and get along well with, having acquaintances, and beyond that, friends in your life. And there's a lot of research that indicates that the more relationships people have, the longer they tend to live and the healthier their life is. And then especially having at least one significant other, having a partner, a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or intimate friendships. So having at least one significant other in your life. And finally, on my list of practical aspects to be happy is to have avocations. We discussed having vocations, but also having avocations, passions, interests, hobbies. And as Albert Ellis used to say, if you like war, then passionately work on having more war. If you like peace, then passionately work on creating more peace. You could join a political party or write blogs or write books about peace. So there are ways to do that. So find an interest, and then of those interests, explore one that you could make more into a passion and have that as one of the guiding lights in your life. And a passion in particularly one that is measurable in terms of goals to get there. So for example, if one of your passions is weightlifting and lifting a certain amount of weight, then that's measurable. You could practice weightlifting weekly and then see how much more weight you can lift regularly, and that's measurable. So the more your passions are measurable, the more you can see how you're doing. And some evidence, research has shown that having small measurable goals toward a larger goal is a good avenue toward happiness. Kevin, did you have, that was pretty much what I wanted to say about happiness. Did you have anything else or final words?
Yeah, I sure do. There was a study a while back. There was a program on Netflix called Happy, and a study was done. Happiness inventory was administered to people in the United States and also to people in Bangladesh. People in Bangladesh, their standard of living is considerably lower than that of the United States. And the interesting thing was that people in both countries scored the same level on average for happiness. And so that directly goes against the idea that having more possessions, wealth, power, prestige, fame is really what makes people happy. Quite often, I remember before I began to work on myself and work on my beliefs and unhelpful behaviors, that I oftentimes felt like I was chasing the rainbow. We can go over the weekend. My wife and I were fortunate enough to buy a new car. Now it's got all the bells and whistles, and we love it. But I know that's just a temporary excitement. True happiness is something that it's about building contentment with where we are despite our circumstances. And I think the vital absorbing interest is also another important part of it, to have something to live for that's outside of ourselves, whether it's a hobby, whether it's political interest, as Michael said, or whatever it is. It's important for us to be involved outside of ourselves as human beings. So
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight one of the things you said there, Kevin, that wealth, prestige, and fame doesn't really make you happy in the long run. And one of the main reasons there is, as we've been highlighting in all our podcasts, is that our emotions, and happiness is an emotion. I feel happy or I feel unhappy. Our emotions don't come from situations like wealth, prestige, and fame, but rather it comes from our thinking about those situations in our life. So this gets back to the main REBT point, which is give up your demands, your must, should, supposed to's, and have to's, demands on yourself, others, and situations. And one of the main ways to give them up is by identifying them. For example, I must do a great podcast. So that's a demand that I could identify, and then ask for the evidence. What's the evidence that because I would like to do a great podcast, I absolutely have to? And since all musts and shoulds are fictions, they don't exist, the right answer is there's no reason I absolutely must do anything well, although I prefer to do it well. And I think it was G.K. Chesterton has been quoted as saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. So do and enjoy the process rather than get a solution for your happiness.
agreed. when you said that, sometimes you and I, Michael, probably take this for granted, but just the idea that our beliefs create our emotions, that is so revolutionary and so empowering, because that basically means that our circumstances, it's possible not to be happy necessarily all the time, because that would be irrational. But despite our level of wealth or whatever, it's possible for anybody listening to us to be reasonably happy.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And one of the happiness surveys I saw, or books on happiness, was someone who traveled to different parts of the world, and he went to different villages and he asked the people, who's the happiest person you know here? And then he would interview that person. And in one of the places, uh, most of the people mentioned this woman as the happiest person there. And so he wanted to track her down and speak with her. It turns out she was in a room in, I think it was a rehab center, an old age home or something like that. And he found her in a room, and she was paralyzed in her bed. And he asked her, well, why are people telling me you're the happiest person around? So she said, well, I'm very happy. I have this window here that I look out and I can see the mountains and the water and the sun. It's so beautiful. I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate to have all this. And so she illustrates the point we're making, that it's really your thinking that is at the base of happiness or unhappiness. So identify the thinking that's making you unhappy, your demands, must, shoulds, awfuls, terribles, horribles, can't stand it's, and global ratings. I'm no good, you're no good, life is no good. Identify those and uproot them. And that really is the key to a happier life. Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you, Chris Rossini, for your part in this. And we will be back again next week. We're here every week with the 3-Minute Therapy podcast. And if you'd like professional help, one-on-one help, contact Kevin or myself, and we'd be happy to work with you. So this is Michael Edelstein and Chris Rossini and the 3-Minute Therapy podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know. And we look forward to hearing from you about this or next week on our next one.